Okay, so we are here with Heather Whaling. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Krista.
Heather is a good friend. We have the amazing opportunity to work with her. She is a fellow lifestyle designer extraordinaire. I admire her so much for how she designs her day and her life. And we get to connect on all of these topics all of the time. And it's such a joy and a pleasure to do that. Heather has raised an amazing young son, 8 years old. So I am constantly watching her raise him and all of the things she does in her conscious parenting practices and in the values they share as a family. She is an entrepreneur and founded Geben Communication and is influencing all of these people's lives through her work. And then she's also out there using her voice and her platform to support maternity and paternity leave for all parents across the board. I mean, Heather, you have an endless impact on the world, but I think so much of that stems back to your foundation that is so intentional, so thoughtful, so strategic. And I imagine this started a long time ago. Is that true?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's probably come to a finer point over the last couple of years, but I think I started Geben in 2009, and I think even that was a values-based decision, and how I wanted to build the company was very rooted in values. So I think it's been a long time in the making.
Oh, that's beautiful. We've had the opportunity to experience your journey over the last, I mean, however many years, a couple, like almost five, maybe getting close to that. And watching you journey through growing your business, growing your family, growing your platform. And one of the ways that we've gotten to watch you do that most recently, and we'll talk about specifically first, so we'll kind of bring it into the present moment, was this year you used the strategic planning for life framework. And we got to experience how you used it. You gave us some thoughts on it. And I was wondering, what was your experience like using that strategic planning for life framework? And maybe what were some of the biggest outcomes that you experienced from that this year?
So I think the part that was most helpful for me is that it gave me a set process to really like crystallize and articulate my personal mission statement, my personal values. Like I said, I had sort of had this like values driven approach to life, but I hadn't really put a like framework around it. And especially doing it for my own personal self. So my son and I, we created our family values probably like 3 or 4 years ago, and those we talk about all the time, but I hadn't taken the time to do it for myself and my own personal values. And so I think being able to take that time and set those values and then use those values to set intentions for the year, and making sure that those intentions were really aligned with the values has made a huge difference for me.
How were you using values? Because I'm so intrigued. You've been using the values based system since when you started your business and raising Evan and having them as a family. How have you used those values to make decisions in your life to date before you did the intentions setting?
So I think in the past, I kind of just generally knew like, well, here are the things that are important to me, or I value quality time. I value like investing in relationships and like deep relationships, not surface level relationships. So I had this sort of broad landscape of what I really appreciated or valued. And so I think that was, sort of always in the background of what I was doing. But I think having now gone through the strategic planning process, instead of it being in the background, it's very much in the foreground of what I'm doing.
Oh. Well, you like leaned right into the question I was going to ask. How does that experience now compare as you were thinking about, you put your intentions in place and you're acting on those things. So what you're saying is that those values became so much more of an integrated, is it fair to say day-to-day part of every decision you're making is
Mhm.
grounded in those values?
Yeah. So that week, like kind of between Christmas and New Year's last year, I rented an Airbnb for a couple days because I wanted to have like that time to really go through this process and do the framework. And so I can tell you sort of a quick story of like kind of how this came, like how it was really applicable for me. So coming out of that process, two of my values are progress requires intentionality and actions spark impact. And so then from there, then I kind of went through and set out like, well, what are my intentions for the year? And one of those intentions was to elevate Geben's future. And I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I knew like coming out of COVID, it was sort of in this like really hard year. We were coming out of COVID. We were coming out in a really strong position. But what could I do to really like jumpstart things and move us forward? So I spent the beginning part of the year, really exploring all different ways that that could come to life, and then sort of landed on this idea of like, well, maybe I could make an acquisition. But I knew it needed to be values driven and not just about like the revenue or the clients. And I think having this values piece, making that in the foreground was really important. And then I think from a timing standpoint, it also just accelerates your progress on those things. So that intention was set basically at the beginning of the year. And then by mid-March, I entered into like letter of agreement or a letter of intention with a firm, and then we closed the acquisition in the middle of May. So basically, in 5 months or so, it went from like, here's this like sort of absurd idea to I'm going to acquire another company. And I don't know that that would have happened, and for sure would not have happened in that time frame had I not taken the time to go through the strategic planning framework and get really clear about my values and my priorities.
Wow. And you know how in awe I am of how quickly I will use the word manifest, but really you act on it to create that impact. So because it's a value, you get moving on it as soon as you have that clarity that it's in alignment with your values, it's in alignment with your life intentions. And then you seem to just bring it back, bring it out of nowhere so quickly. But I do agree that it is the power and we see this so often with that absurdity. It feels like, wow, that feels really absurd to think that that's possible. And then
Mhm.
what so often happens is that it comes into reality so much faster than you ever thought possible.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was probably one of the more surprising things, right? Like the absurd list is part of the strategic framework that you all have. And so as I was making the absurd list, it like really felt absurd. Like I'm looking at the things on there, I was like, this is just like, what am I thinking? But then as I like look back now, so I do these kind of quarterly check-ins with myself to see like, how am I staying aligned with values? How am I progressing towards the intentions? And it's amazing to see that actually a couple of those like absurd ideas are in motion or have already happened. It's almost like I needed to give myself permission to think about these like big, audacious ideas. But then once you give yourself that permission and you get them sort of out of your head, and it really becomes like a mindset of how could you bring this into reality? It's amazing to see that what you thought was absurd is maybe not actually such a wild idea. And for me, like buying a company was on that list of absurd things. But less than 5 months later, then it wasn't absurd, it was reality.
So, and this, I remember when you told me we're acquiring a company, and in traditional terms, right, the way that I've always experienced business, it's a growth move. That's a growth choice, and typically it's about finances and it's about like just growing your company. But for you, it felt like this was a very strategic. When you talk about elevating Geben, it was very strategic in alignment with your life vision and
Mhm.
what you want the company to be for you, the people you support. Is that true? Was there that bigger meaning? And then there was also the value system that grounded it down and was like, yes, this is it.
Yeah, it was that I think exactly that. It wasn't about like, oh, I want to hit a certain revenue threshold and so let's go acquire a company to get there. It was more about like, how do we elevate the company as a whole to then create more opportunities for people on the team. It creates more opportunity for us to do well in the world. Like the word Geben means to give. So I'm a big believer that the more you give, the more you're able to grow, and the more you can grow, the more you can give. And so this created a moment in time where we could really take that to another level. And then, I got connected to a woman who had started a company that shared a lot of the same values that we have. And before we ever talked about finances and that part of the deal, we talked about values and culture alignment. And we were so in lockstep there that everything else sort of fell into place pretty quickly.
So powerful. And I couldn't agree more that, the more you and Geben grow in that platform, and I've had the very fortunate opportunity to work with your team, and they're incredible humans. And so the ripple effect that you specifically create as you go down these endeavors, I think, the world gets to be a better place because you choose to follow that absurd list. You could have very quickly or easily gotten in your head and said, well, that's not possible. But then you all of a sudden leaned into that, and you build this bigger platform, then that can have bigger impact in the world per your values. So again, Phil and I just had this conversation about, the return on intention versus the return on investment.
Mm, I
And
love that.
yeah, it's so in this story, it's so prominent because you were so intentional about the experience and about the process and what you're trying to create, that then you pull in a partner and a company that deeply aligns with your values, then creates all these experiences for all these people and opportunities, and just like becomes so much more expansive in a very, like you said, do like you're doing well, it becomes so much more expansive in that way, in support of I think of more positive momentum in the world. So it's very inspiring. I hope every entrepreneur is listening to that story and understanding the impact that your choices made on such a bigger scale right now. And I'm sure you see where it's going to take you in the long term.
I hope so. Yeah, I think I have an idea of where it's going. But I think so. Going back to what you were saying about the return on intention and the ROI piece, right? Like normally you think about ROI as like, what is the time you're spending, or the money you're spending, or the, in this case, energy and mind share that you're spending. And I think, I spent a couple of days like building out with a framework. So there's certainly a time and an energy and a mind share standpoint there. And now, like I said, I do these quarterly like solo retreats with myself, basically just to like check in on my progress and make sure actions are aligned. But I think for me, that piece is also energizing. So like, yes, it requires me to set aside the time and to protect that time. But when I'm done with it, I come back with this like renewed, refreshed sense of like what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And it like, then, sometimes you get a little stuck in the weeds sometimes, but you can like zoom out and see what is that bigger picture, and make sure, at least for me, I need that like focused time to make sure that what I'm doing is designing or creating like this life that I actually want to be living. And that I'm not just getting caught up in the like day to day and haphazardly going through every day, but being really intentional about what's the life I want to build.
That's such a good thought process, because it can be difficult to hold yourself accountable to your strategic plan once you've created it. One, first, it's sometimes difficult to just set aside the time to say, I'm going to spend a weekend or a week creating my strategic plan, or my family's strategic plan, or the business's strategic plan. But when you see that return at the end of the day, it feels so much more meaningful. And it really, you can see the impact of what that time creates. And you specifically have created a system for yourself, right? Is it quarterly basis to go do check-ins where you actually get away, get out of the weeds of life, which are so kind of drag us in, but you get out of the weeds and you go kind of zoom back up out of your 30,000 foot view and take a look at the landscape at an
Yeah.
Airbnb that's inspiring, right?
Yeah. So I try to get out of the day to day as much as I can. And I've really tried to operationalize it in my life. So we use Monday.com as like our project management tool at work. And I have a separate Monday board just for myself, where I have what my intentions are for the year. And then what are the action items that go with that? What are the deadlines? What's the progress? So I've created sort of this whole workflow around how do I bring these intentions to
Mm.
life? And I think that that's been helpful too in holding me accountable, that it's not just something that I like wrote on a piece of paper or like saved in Dropbox somewhere, that like it's front and center for me every day. Um, so that like I can't forget about it. Like it would be really hard at this point to sort of just forget that I had set these intentions and get lost in the day to day, because I've built it into my life in a way that like makes it a priority.
When you read those, or how frequently do you read them and look at them?
So from the mission statement and the values, I created like a desktop wallpaper. So when you like open up my laptop, the mission statement and values are the first thing that you see. So I see those basically every day, all day. And then
Amazing.
the Monday board, like I check it, I probably don't check it all the time, but it's sort of that thing that's always there. And then because I have the deadline set up, then in the workflow, it like just adds like, hey, by the way, this week you're supposed to be focusing on this. And so then I can either update it or adjust the deadline, or, move whatever the next steps are. And then when I do those quarterly planning retreats, then I like really dive into the Monday board and figure out, okay, did I make the progress I was supposed to make last quarter? What needs to be updated? What else can be added?
Mm.
Um, so it's just there front and center.
It's so important though, right? Because it allows us, it's like the visibility that
Yes.
keeps our brains tethered to that. And
Yeah.
I find that when we get off track or feel like we're getting into the weeds too much, we'll always go back and read that. And it's like a tether. It's like a
Yeah.
straight shot back to what those intentions are, what your values are, so that you're always kind of operating in that system, especially when times get challenging, because times get challenging and you get a little lost. And to
Yeah.
have them accessible, I love the Monday board idea.
I think it's helpful too. Like, it took me a little while maybe to figure this out, but understand like what is it that you need to hold yourself accountable. And so like I'm a data person and I'm a list person, right? And so like I set a goal at the beginning of the year, the number of books I want to read, and then I track it in Goodreads. So I know like, am I on track with that? Or, I have like when I do my daily meditation, I have to use an app that then tracks like each day that I'm meditating. So then I can see like, am I being consistent with my meditation? And I find that like if I don't have that visual piece that says, yes, you're doing it on a consistent basis, then it becomes like much harder for me to hold myself accountable. But
Mm.
everybody is different in like, what is it that you need to stay motivated and hold yourself accountable? So I think part of it too is like, what I think is so great about this framework is you give people a framework, but then it's flexible enough that within that framework, each individual person or company or family can figure out how to make it work for themselves and how to set it up in a way that works for them in their life so they can hold themselves accountable.
It's that's so important for people to remember, because I think in today's world, we're always told, this is how you should do something. This is how you should meditate. This is how you should work out. These are the results that you should get. But you're right, everyone is different. And the idea is to have the framework, but to really design it for yourself and then
Yeah.
get ideas from other people. So someone now listening might be like, oh, that's actually a really good idea for how to track your reading. I could do it in Goodreads. I would
Yep.
assume that something like Goodreads, or not Goodreads, reading is a non-negotiable for you. Is that true? Like a daily non-negotiable I'm hearing like meditation, Goodreads, things that are built like filling up your energy cup and keeping you going.
Yeah. So I started this new like 2 out of 3. And so between meditating, riding my Peloton, like riding my bike or doing yoga, I have to do 2 of those 3 each day.
Oh, I love
And
that.
so then it can, maybe I don't have time for like a long, sweaty bike ride, but I can like fit in a quick, like 10 or 20 minute yoga, and then I can still make time to meditate. Whereas there are other days where like maybe I do have time for a more like longer, and then I could do like a good bike ride and yoga. So that 2 out of 3 piece has been really helpful for me. It's hard for me to have like every single day I have to do this, right? And like that, to your point though, of like everybody has to find their thing. Like I don't have like daily non-negotiables, but I have like I can't go more than a day or 2 without these things. Like certainly there's a day that'll go where I don't read and it doesn't throw off the whole week. But if I go more than like 2 or 3 days without reading, I am I'm like naturally introverted, and I think that that is like refilling my like energy cup time of just solo time. And so I know that like sure it may not happen every day, but if I go 2 days without it happening, like I start to get really anxious and like the week starts to go off the path. But that was what I had to figure out for me of like it doesn't have to be a daily, not like that was a lot of pressure for me of like every day you have to do this. But like it's just not going to happen. I know that. And so instead it was like take a step back and figure out like, well, what is the version of that works for me?
Gosh, I love that, because what we believe is that intention is so rooted, living and designing a life with intention is so rooted in self-awareness. And
Mhm.
that piece for you, it's not about perfection, but it's about having those simplified things that you can always go back to, that okay, I'm feeling a little agitated, anxious. I might be like spouting off to my partner, or maybe a little less present with my team. I might need to go meditate or have some
Yeah.
alone time or go on a bike ride.
Yes.
It
Yes.
makes it so much easier to stay accountable to the work, which
Yes.
I love. And so
And
much of this
and
process is that.
yes, and to know what the tools are that you have at your disposal so that if you do start to feel like that inner tension or anxiety or frustration or whatever, like what can you do to take a step back instead of, I think what I've learned over the last few years is instead of just plowing through the negative energy, like take a step back,
Mm.
disconnect from it, get your head back on straight, and then go back to whatever you were trying to do.
I wish that I could just take that snippet, just magnify it. I will, in a quote, because it's so important. It's so much of the business context, and especially in work context, is hustle, 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 push through. And that sports is the same way. Everything's kind of that same way. Push, push, push. And what I appreciate about what you just said is Yet sometimes that effort is necessary, but if you're really feeling that, it's really powerful to stop, pause, take a breath, realign, recenter, get your head back on straight, and then move forward.
Yeah.
I've been wondering as we've been talking, how has this work, strategic planning for life, designing your day with intention, your values that you've instilled from the very get go, how has it influenced other areas of your life? So, like being a mother, I always think about this with the kids. I can tell when I start to get off track, when I'm not being as intentional, I start to become less of who I want to be as a mother, for instance, or because it's not just business. All these parts are, part of your life, and you've probably visioned all those things within the strategic planning for life. So, how has this work influenced all areas of your life or other areas of your life?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because sort of how I got into this whole idea of like mindfulness and intentionality was around like, what is the kind of mom that I want to be? And when Evan was young, I was feeling like really anxious. And I was like, and I felt like I was not being like really present and engaged with him the way that I wanted to. And so that's actually what started my journey down this like mindfulness and meditation, was like, I need to find a better way of showing up with him, and like, how do I create the like parenting dynamic that I want with him? How can I be like a really good present mom? How can I be very intentional? And so that's sort of the whole conscious parenting was kind of my start into this. And then it's just sort of unfolded from that. And so like I feel like I've kind of it's a little bit of, you have to deprogram yourself almost like step by step, right? So like I had to deprogram myself around what does society tell you is how you should parent your kid. And then like the last couple of years I spent time like deprogramming what is the value of time, and who says how your time should be spent, and who says you have to work from 9 to 5, and like what is it that actually aligns with my values versus what is it that what is that just society teaches you and we just internalize that, and how can we deprogram ourselves from that. And I think having now gone through this framework, then I can have this very like values driven approach, so that when I'm thinking about things and I'm feeling like, wait, is that what I actually believe, or is that what some societal construct that has been forced on me, and which of those is actually true, and how can I separate the societal construct from my own personal values to make better decisions for myself and my company and my family and all those different pieces. But there's a lot of deprogramming I think that has to happen. And I think when you articulate your values and you set your intentions, it gives you almost like a roadmap to help with that deprogramming.
Yes, I all of that. So powerful. That idea of not just accepting and doing the things that we've always been told to do. Those are helpful so we understand what's happening around us. But you have deprogrammed so that you can get really grounded in what you care about most, who you
Yes.
really are, and what you want out of your life. So you're then making those iterative design decisions around that as parameters instead of what everybody else does or expects you to do or society tells you you should do. You can do that. So what do you think has been the biggest impact in your life that you can think of from living in that way?
Well, I mean, in the sort of recency bias, I guess, but certainly in the most recent thing, the acquiring a company, like, I don't know that that would have happened had
Mm,
I not gone through this process the way that I have. So certainly that is one big piece of it. Then I think I'm in the process now of, so I know you and Phil recently had the couple of episodes around money and like each of your relationships to money. And those were so timely for me because I think I'm working on like, for myself, deprogramming what are the societal norms around money and what is clear that like, what is different that I believe, and how can I get clear um, around what aligns with my values, instead of just, well, that's how everybody thinks about money, and you're supposed to like do this with it, or you're supposed to save it this way, or you're supposed to spend it that way. And instead trying, because I have this values framework now created, then I can take a step back, I think, and separate like, what are my values or my relationship to money, and how can I pull that apart from what I've learned from family or media or other outside sources. It all ties together, because one of the things in my like Monday board that came out of my strategic framework is that I need to renovate my kitchen, or I want to renovate my kitchen. So like I bought my house a few years ago. It's a great house. I love it. The one room that I'm like, don't really love is the kitchen. It's not like my style. It's set up kind of weird. So I want to renovate the kitchen, and I keep finding myself like getting hung up on the cost. And so I like listened to your podcasts. I've read a bunch of stuff. I've like talked about it ad nauseum, like with my partner, with Matt. And like, I think what I'm learning is I'm letting like the sort of story around the price tag. So sort of this narrative I've made up in my head about like, wow, that's expensive. I'm letting the story in my head around the price tag outweigh my other values, like investing in experiences and prioritizing quality time. And so I think that for me is like, there's a way that people have been, or not people, me, there's a way that I've been programmed to think about money that isn't in alignment with my own personal values. But because, for my entire life has been brought, kind of this way of thinking around money, like that's hard to then unwire and figure out like, where is my actual personal belief in this? So I think that this is me talking in a circle because I don't have a good answer. Like I'm still very like in the middle of doing the work, right? Like I think I've done a good job of deconstructing or deprogramming around parenting and time. And I think now this money piece is like the next big focus that it's not going to get solved in like a week. But I think having these values clearly articulated gives me a baseline to work from, and then to like question the story that I'm telling myself and come up with a better answer.
Well, I so appreciate you sharing that because one, we are always doing the work somewhere, right? If we're doing
Yes.
it well, we're always in exploration somewhere, some topic. You spoke really eloquently about it and really well. So I know you're in the midst of it, and I know how uncomfortable that can be because I get very verbose when I don't have the concise story in my head.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing it in the midst of it. And I think that it's such a good important point to hit on is that you might develop your strategic plan for life, but then you come up with you find these challenges that you're like, well, whoa, my money story is holding me back from doing this thing that I set out to do. Now I'm going to unravel from that. I need to deprogram from this story and decide what I want to carry forward and what I'm just going to let go of or heal, right? Sometimes, like my money story put me all the way back into a therapist's office to start talking about where did this stem from? Like what happened here? Just to better understand it. So I appreciate you sharing that. And as you're in
Yeah.
the midst of it, what decision what have you made a decision on the kitchen? And what decision are you making? Or are you just still kind of in the process of deciding?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so two things. So I haven't really, I mean, in my head, I know like this is like, I'm not spending like an exorbitant amount. It's a good use of money. It will create a space then where we can have friends and family over, or where my son and his friends will want to hang out. And so it totally aligns with my values, and I'm doing it in a responsible way. My head knows that. I'm not quite there all the way yet. So I'm working on that. But I think the thing that it just connected for me as you were talking. So I go do the strategic plan like in an Airbnb, or I like go by myself. And part of the reason that I do that is because I want to clear out all of the noise and all of the distractions. And so it becomes really just me and my like inner voice and my inner intentions, and I would bring those to life. And then now though, when I'm like back in the real world and you've got kids and work and email and chores and dinner and all these like other distractions that are feeding into that, then that's where this like story of money came up. Like the story of money or the story of doing a new kitchen like was not an issue when I put this strategic framework to place,
Wow.
because I think I had cleared out a lot of the distractions. Now that those distractions are there, that now it's becoming like a thing of like, ooh, should I really do that? But when I had cleared all of that out, it was crystal clear that like, of course I should do that.
Yes.
That all just connected right now. I'm so glad we had this chat.
I love that. Well, it's such a good point too, because when you do when you're in that space, you're in a different energy. You're
Yes.
more in your essence, you're more in your truth without all of this egoic chatter happening, which is why we work with Juan Alvarez and his
Yeah.
meditation coaching, because it's a great complement to setting intentions and designing your life. Because we do hit these boundaries and barriers mentally, like in our inner stories, when we're in life, because our energy starts going down, we're being pulled in all these different directions. And I think you just made such a good point as to why it's so important to stop, pause, get out of the weeds, really think about it, really spend some time with it, get back in that essence energy, and then make the decision from there. Because my guess is if you put yourself in that same energy and you think about old woman Heather, however old you're going to be looking back on your life, that old woman would be like, yeah, do the kitchen, right?
Yeah, of course.
She might just be like, yeah, for all the experiences and memories that are going to happen in that environment, than to
Mhm.
actually do that. But have you, I guess another good question though, is that sometimes I might put myself in that old woman Krista shoes and look back on my life. And sometimes I'll say, oh, no, actually I shouldn't, because something might be guiding me in a different direction. Have you ever had one of those
Mm.
moments?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I have. I can't think of one off the top of my head. But I mean, I think it's the balance of how do you stay present in like what do you need versus letting your mind create a story around something that may or may not actually be there. And I think it's, it's the idea of like, what can you do today to design the life that you want so that then when you do get 20, 30, 40 years down the road, you've like built this life that you love and you're really proud of it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Not any day you look back and you're like, I always say that you look back any day and you're like, damn, I'm so glad I did it that way. Even if it was just yesterday, because
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
time in life. So as you look ahead and you think about the future and where you're heading with the kitchen and the business, and as a parent and a leader, both in your business and in the community, and as a partner to Matt and your life, how do you see strategic planning for life and your maybe even just your intentional lifestyle design? Where do you see it taking you? What's next?
I think it's, I think certainly I have a plan that I'm working for the rest of this year and have articulated those intentions and I'm going to, continue working through those. But then like, I love this process of doing the annual planning and the quarterly check-ins. And so I think I'll keep doing that and keep being really open to the absurd list and what's on the absurd list. And there's probably something now that isn't even anywhere on my radar that when I sit down in December to do my absurd list will come up and like that will be a thing that I'll be like, yeah, let's try that. Like, why not do that? So I think there's that piece of it. But then I think also like finding like small ways to infuse being really strategic and intentional throughout all the different aspects of your life. So I think I do like a pretty good job of it at work. I think Evan and I have like defined our family values and we do a good job with that. Like Matt and I just started doing like relationship check-ins. So like this weekly, like just almost like you would have a check-in with like somebody at work of just like, hey, how are things going? Like what's gone well? What's not gone well? What do you need from me this week? What does the schedule and logistics look like? And so I think that's just something we've only been doing that now for a few weeks, but it's already proven to be so helpful. And it's a good reminder too, that it doesn't have to be like a big thing. Like I'm going to go buy a company or redo my kitchen. Like sometimes there can be like these really small things of like prioritizing quality time that it can happen in these like tiny moments in your everyday life and those can be just as impactful too and it doesn't only have to center on like these huge ideas.
Yes, you're speaking my language. We often hear that so much from people where they write down their life intentions and they say, I just don't feel like it's big enough or cool enough.
Mm,
And so often it's like, well, some of the most meaningful things we can do in our life is share those moments with our partners,
mhm.
build deeper relationships and connections. Phil and I realized we thought that your relation just organically strengthens without having check-ins. No.
It
So
certainly does not.
it does not. No one told me.
Yeah,
So
they left that out of the handbook.
a handbook would be so nice. But we do the same thing, 30 minutes every night after the kids go down. We sit down, we connect because it's so like that is part of the intentional lifestyle design and what's next is deeper relationships and really spending time with the people we love. Those what we call micro moments can
Yes.
be so powerful, meaningful in life.
Yeah. I had read Brene Brown's Gifts of Imperfection, and they talked about how one of the pieces that's like really critical for like joy and wholehearted living is a gratitude practice. And that was like a new concept for me. Like, I feel like I'm a really grateful person, and I like try to be aware of like all the things that I have to have gratitude around. but I don't think I had built a practice around it much, right? You like build a mindfulness practice and there's like a structure around that. But like, what does it look like to have a structure around a gratitude practice? And so I'm working on that now of like every day setting aside time of like, what am I grateful for? Reflecting on like, not only like what are those small things, but then what are all the things that had to fall into place to allow that moment to
Mm,
happen?
yeah.
And I think that that's been really helpful too. But again, like I don't know that I would have had the thought to be so intentional about it had I not taken the time to do some of this other work. But even that, it's like a really short thing that you can do every day to cultivate gratitude that research says has a huge impact.
Yeah, on your mental health, your emotional health, how
Yeah,
you feel.
everything.
So often we reach out for things like strategic planning for life because we want to feel a different way in life. We
Mm,
envision this different way. And sometimes it's as small as just making sure that you have a good gratitude practice or a
mhm.
meditation practice or a relationship time with your partner. It doesn't have to be something massive. I'm so glad you shared that. As you were talking about the practice and gratitude and what it does, it made me take this big deep breath into myself. It was like very grounding to hear you talk
Mm,
about it. So thank you for sharing that. I think that is a gift for people because we don't often hear Brené Brown and that book. We often hear Daring Greatly and
yeah, dare to
um,
lead.
Dare to Lead. Yeah, yeah. So thank you for sharing that reference. I think that is very helpful for people. So as
Good.
you think about too, as we get ready to sign off, but as you think about other people who might be considering something like strategic
Mm.
planning for life or just intentional design or even values design for themselves and their family, what would you recommend for them? Like, if they're saying, well, it's too much time to get away for a weekend or to have a quarterly practice or too much effort to have a Monday board or anything like that, what would you tell them?
I think that there's no price that you can put on prioritizing how you want to design your life. Because otherwise, if you don't prioritize that time or you don't put in even just a little bit of effort, then all of a sudden you get 10 years down the road and you're living a life that isn't the life you wanted to live. And you've lived a life that you've allowed someone else to design your life instead of you like harnessing that power and control to design your own life.
Mm.
So I think it's invaluable and necessary. And then I think at a tactical level, like maybe you can't take a big chunk of time away to do a strategic planning thing, but can you get some protected, uninterrupted time to really focus on this work? And then, maybe a little bit at the end of the year and then, a little bit each quarter. And I think going back to what I was saying before, like eliminating as many of those distractions as you can. And it probably, maybe if you've never done it, it seems a little silly of like, you're going to take a solo retreat by yourself. Like, why would you do that? Or with your partner? Like, so if you can carve out that time though, just for yourself, I think people will end up being amazed where your thoughts lead you when you aren't surrounded by all the normal distractions of work and home. And I think that that allows you then to really hone in on what is the life you want to create and then what do you need to do to make that happen.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I love that you provide the context of it's important for you to think, be away for yourself and to be in yourself because even in our couples work, in our business work, it all starts with self. It all starts with
Mhm.
getting that quiet time away and who you are and what you value so that when you bring other people into your ecosystem, you have that intentionality and that groundedness and then you build deeper, better relationships, have more productivity together. So I appreciate that with all that you have going on. To go back to where we started, you have such a strong presence in so many people's lives. You make such an impact per your values, and you carry so much in your life. And I appreciate that you do this work for yourself. And I'm sure that your family appreciates it, and your employees and your team, and all the people that you influence, your clients. I'm sure that everybody appreciates it, even if they don't know it. So thank
Yeah,
you
well,
for
and it's
doing the work.
absolutely. It's one of those things, even if they don't appreciate it, I know that it's having an impact on myself and how I show up in all of those relationships. And so then it's worthwhile for
Yes,
me.
absolutely. Heather, thank you so much for spending the time. It was awesome to get to talk to you. I want to share all of your tools and tactics with the world. So I'll probably be asking you more questions as we go. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you for creating the space.
Yeah, of course. All right. Talk soon.